Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. I got some very unfortunate news today. The war has taken a turn for the worse. In just the past few hours, there's been a major escalation, and the mainstream is not talking about it yet, but they will be in the days coming forward because everything seems to be lining up for Belarus to directly enter this conflict. Now, there's been an attack on a Belarusian airbase just south of the capital, Minsk, just minutes south of the capital city of Belarus, okay? There was a Russian spy plane, an AWACS plane, one of 9 of their fleet. These are very expensive airplanes. I'm going to show you some pictures of where exactly this attack took place and what plane was damaged. But this is a $300 million airplane that was destroyed in this attack that they're alleging was Ukrainian drones. Now, there's some Ukrainian intelligence coming out that no, this was in fact Belarusian defectors signaling that there might be some disunity within that country. We're going to talk about the consequences of this because remember, just earlier this week, Lukashenko made a promise that if we are attacked, we will directly enter the war. Now, let's put in perspective what has happened just in the past week. You have the Russian suspension of the final remaining nuclear treaty, signaling a new nuclear arms race. We have Lukashenko pledging to expand their military by 150,000, saying that they can have 1.5 million in military reserves if they need to. Of course, we had him say that if we are attacked, we're going to enter the conflict. On the same week, you have Moscow suspending oil to Poland via the Druzhba pipeline. You have Poland installing anti-tank Hedgehog defense systems on the border with Belarus as well as the border with Kaliningrad. On the same week, you have the Moldovan front being called into question with the Transnistrian ammo dump being eyed by the Ukrainians. Moldova has called on Transnistria to demilitarize and they want the Russians out. Ukrainians are saying, well, we can help you out. Now, apparently, Russian intelligence has intercepted a memo that was sent by the Ukrainian military to a border town by Transnistria that was supposed to be the recipient of weapons and ammunition for some Ukrainian provocations. So there's a lot of mixed messages. Bakhmut is being encircled. It's pretty much encircled now. It's only a matter of time now before the Russians finally take that city. There's apparently 10,000 to 20,000 Ukrainian soldiers still trapped there. So things are escalating in a major way. We have China, according to German intelligence now, about to send hundreds of kamikaze drones to the Russians to support their war effort. Now, this could all, the brakes could be put on this World War III thing if the following story carries any water. We have bird flu outbreak in South America worrying the WHO. Apparently there was 2 people who contracted it. One, of course, was an 11-year-old girl who died. They're not sure yet whether this was human-to-human transmission. We're talking about bird flu here with a fatality rate, conservatively speaking, north of 20%. Now, they're saying that the strain that this little girl contracted and died by is not as lethal as the bird flu that we're accustomed to. Regardless, she still passed away. So that signals that this has likely a high fatality rate if it is human-to-human transmission. Regardless, we're seeing an unprecedented amount of bird flu in the world right now in wild bird populations as well as birds, domesticated birds. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before that story overshadows everything else. If there's one thing that could potentially put the brakes on World War III, it's a global bird flu outbreak. Okay, now we have Zelensky going back to the World War III front. We're going to go into greater depth in all this. This is just a summary, believe it or not. Zelensky is saying, hey, China, we're going to dignify your offer on a peace plan, and I would like to come to China to talk about this peace plan. Now, for starters, a lot of people think that this is going to go nowhere simply by virtue of the fact that the Ukrainians aren't willing to negotiate at all unless Russia exits the country entirely, which everybody knows is never going to happen. The problem, though, is Zelensky going to China. Not only is that letting the fox into the henhouse from their perspective, but it would be the equivalent of me wanting to make a deal with the McDonald's Corporation and trying to negotiate with a cashier. The fact of the matter is, unless NATO and the United States in particular is at the table of those discussions, it's all just for public consumption, and it's virtually meaningless in terms of actually getting some sort of peace deal negotiated. And of course, with China potentially at war with the United States, we have to understand that the sincerity of China wanting to help the Russians make some sort of concessions and help the Ukrainians by encouraging the Russians to make concessions should be called into question on its face. We have no more oil to Poland, according to Russia. I think I briefly already hinted about that. We have North Korea warning the United States and South Korea that if they persist in their joint military exercises, that it will be viewed as an act of war. Now, just within the past 48 hours, we have a U.S. nuclear submarine now docked in South Korea, of course, armed with nuclear missiles. This is a major provocation. We have Israel planning to attack Iran. On the same day, Saudi has allegedly turned its back on BRICS. Well, at least so it appears, because the Saudi Arabian envoy went to Ukraine today and pledged $400 million to the Ukrainians. Are they just hedging their bets? It's hard to say, but we do know that the Saudis and the Israelis have made some joint military plans in order to counteract the Iranian threat within their region. So it starts to look as though perhaps the Saudis are just playing the BRICS nations for suckers and just trying to hedge their bets, kind of trying to do something like Turkey, where they're playing both sides of the fence, okay? We have Romanian air defense deployed along the borders with Moldova. According to Morgan Stanley, the U.S. markets are in a death zone, and the S&P 500 could drop 26 percentage points this year. We also, of course, may see Russian nuclear testing. We're going to talk about the possible motivations for them bringing back actual nuclear testing. And we're going to look at an infographic that shows when resources are going to run out around the world, and talk a little bit about how this is going to factor in to this conflict that we're seeing right now. So the main story of the day is this attack on the Belarusian airfield here, okay? So this is just south of Minsk. So this is the capital. Remember the Minsk agreement, which was brokered in part by Belarus to try to bring peace to Ukraine and Russia. Well, this is the airstrip here. As you can see, there's just helicopters here right now. But there was a AWACS spy plane, that's this plane right here, which apparently has been destroyed. This is one of 9 in the Russian fleet that has been destroyed. They, of course, use this to do reconnaissance and surveillance of Ukrainian military, and obviously as the basis for their air raids on the country. And apparently there's been a clash on the Belarusian border. According to Russian sources, on Sunday, February 26, a Belarusian soldier has been killed on the Belarus border due to clashes with Ukrainian forces. There's also been unconfirmed reports of explosions at Machilishchi Air Base in Belarus, which damaged at least one Russian military plane and snow removal equipment. Probably not going to need that snow removal equipment because apparently winter didn't come to Europe this year, but it's sure coming to California right now. Of course, Belarus has been gifted Iskander missile launchers from Russia. And right now, unfortunately, Lukashenko has to make a decision, because just recall last week he said that we will enter this conflict if we are attacked. Now, I don't think that Russia nor Belarus would benefit from Belarus actually entering the conflict. For one, that would create a lot of political instability within the country. The last thing Putin wants, or Lukashenko wants, is riots in their streets and that level of political division, especially if you have these defectors. According to Ukrainians, the Ukrainian sources are saying that these attacks on this airbase were actually committed by Belarusian defectors, okay? Behind enemy lines, so to speak, an inside job of sorts. Now, some people will probably even go as far to say, well, maybe this was a false flag perpetrated so that Belarus can enter the conflict. But I don't think there's any strategic utility for Belarus actually entering the war. If anything, it would only increase the liabilities of Russians' western flank. The last thing they want is a destabilized border with Belarus. Belarus is kind of the buffer zone between some of the Baltic states and, of course, Poland and Russia. So that the last thing they really want is for that to happen. Now you can see here, this is that pipeline, the Druzhda pipeline, I believe. And there's one that goes into like Hungary, Slovakia, and all those places. One that goes into Poland. That has basically been turned off. So there's very little east-west petrol flows currently occurring. Of course, Nord Stream has been completely destroyed. There's a whole network of pipelines that flow from Russia into Europe. Most of them have basically been turned off. Okay, so that means that there's little financial incentive at this point in time for Russians to make peace with NATO. And it doesn't look good, guys. It looks like this war is just getting ready to spiral out of control. So there was a memo that was leaked. Let me see if I can find the actual memo for you guys. Here it is. So this is the supposed memo that was intercepted by Russian intelligence. They claim that this, I can't read it, of course, maybe some of you guys can. They claim that this was a memo that was intended for Ukrainian military to direct more ammunition and forces to this border town here. So this is the border between, this yellow strip here is what the Russians control. Okay, that's called Transnistria. This is a better map to show it. So this is the breakaway pro-Russian Transnistria. Okay, and there's a border town that the Ukrainians are going to be sending weapons to. And apparently, of course, the Ukrainians were saying that the Russians were going to stage a false flag operation whereby which they attacked themselves, and both sides are accusing the other. It's one of these classic things that we've seen throughout this conflict, both sides accusing the other of getting ready to conduct some sort of false flag operation. Either way, this has prompted Romania to install air defense systems along the border with Moldova. Of course, Moldova has given the Transnistrians an ultimatum that they need to demilitarize, so it's only a matter of time before they go into that region. They have declined the help of the Ukrainians, as you can see here. The authorities of Transnistria have banned entry into their territory of citizens of Ukraine who do not have relatives among local residents. So the Moldovans are saying, we don't need your help, Ukraine. Recall, there is a very pro-Russian subset of the population within Moldova, just like there is a pro-Russian set of the population in most of these former Warsaw Pact countries. And as a result of that, there would be a lot of pushback if Ukraine were to do Moldova a favor by taking care of the Russians in Transnistria. The whole reason for this, I personally think, is this ammunition dump right here, which is 20,000 tons of weaponry, enough weapons to fuel the Ukrainian war machine with their Soviet-era equipment for 1 year. 1 year of fighting in just this one place. So tell me that that's not motivation, especially when it's relatively easy picking, considering there's only around 1,500 Russian troops here, although there may be more now, that more will be deployed as, of course, the threats to that region start to intensify. You can see here on the Live UA map, the battle for Bakhmut. This isn't entirely doing it justice. This is a very pro-Ukraine map. Understand that what's happened now is that the pincer has almost closed, and the ways in to supply the troops that are still stuck in Bakhmut, there's around 10,000 to 20,000 Ukrainian troops stuck here. The Russians have basically encircled, and now they're going to start lighting it up just like they did in Mariupol, apparently. So what does that all mean? I don't know. A lot of people are starting to say now, well, maybe the Russians aren't going to do this major winter offensive. The window for that is closing. Recall that the reason why a lot of the shenanigans happened this time last year with the Russian convoys being destroyed is because the ground was too muddy. Okay, so they couldn't take these tanks. They were having these mile-long convoys right out in the open on the roadways because it was too muddy. So we're already approaching the muddy season, and there hasn't even really been a lot of winter because Europe has been so abnormally warm. We're talking like 20 degrees Celsius warmer than average in some places. It is absolutely insane, the weather situation. So not only do we have conflict and bird flu contagion, but we also got this weird climate anomaly to contend with. We have a show of force in Estonia. Recently, they had some sort of holiday celebration, military parade, something like that. But there was 2 U.S. B-52 strategic bombers that flew over Estonia. Okay, and recall that Estonia ain't too far from St. Petersburg, one of Russia's biggest cities. So you know that tension is rising at a rapid rate. I mean, just this concern that Putin is going to start doing nuclear testing again is something else. I mean, here's the reasons why Russia may restart their nuclear testing. They're saying that the nuclear tests could potentially have 2 goals. First, Russia will use nuclear tests as a tool of coercive diplomacy. Tests will be timed to coincide with events of political or military importance. These tests could occur ahead of new offensives in Ukraine or an expansion of Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure. Now, if this attack on Belarus was determined to be from a Ukrainian drone, then you can expect in the week ahead there's going to be some major bombardments of civilian critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Beyond Ukraine, nuclear testing could precede efforts to destabilize other Russian neighbors, such as the potential plot to overthrow the Moldovan government. These nuclear tests would serve as signals that Russia is willing to use its arsenal in the event of U.S. or NATO operations against Russia. In the case of Russian military operations, whether the current operation in Ukraine or future operations elsewhere, these tests could be a part of a Russian strategy to prevent the escalation of a local conflict into a regional conflict. So there's a variety of different explanations as to how the Russians would benefit from conducting a nuclear test. It's not looking good. What else do we got going on here? We have, according to German intelligence, China to supply hundreds of, I had to cross the word out because the algorithm doesn't like that word, S-drones, the drones that destroy themselves, kamikaze drones to Russia by April, will activate Su-27 fighters. Okay, without naming sources, the German magazine Der Spiegel reported on February 23rd that Russia is currently in talks with a Chinese company to acquire hundreds of Chinese kamikaze drones. Of course, NATO has said this is a red line, and if you cross it, then we're not going to be too happy about it. I know I should probably be prioritizing the bird flu story, but while we're on topic of war, we might as well just talk about this. Russian Skyfall. I've been talking about the Skyfall system in the past few videos and what it is. It's a nuclear propulsion aircraft that flies around continuously and is, of course, is armed with a nuclear weapon. So it says here that and this is pictures of it, guys. They're actually working on this system, okay? And while there is no clear understanding of exactly how Skyfall's propulsion system is arranged, there is only a version that is a gas-phase nuclear rocket engine with a working fluid of atmospheric air. So how it works is there's a nuclear reactor and that's actually powering. So it's initially propelled by a solid fuel, and then once it gets up to a certain altitude, the nuclear reactor turns on. And the only way the nuclear reactor can be cooled is if it is in flight, as if it is when it's going Mach 1 and above. And without that cooling, it's going to cause a nuclear meltdown. So it's an interesting technology. Apparently, they're further along in its development than U.S. intelligence thought. And this is just one more, checkmate solution in addition to all the air-to-air, surface-to-air, and air-to-ground hypersonic weapons, the Sarmat delivery system, the Poseidon, nuclear torpedoes, the EMP weapons. Russia is definitely preparing for a strategic engagement of apocalyptic proportions. North Korea is saying that U.S. drills amount to a declaration of war. So, this isn't really even in the news lately, which is incredibly concerning, seeing as the North Koreans, just in the past year alone, have increased their nuclear ICBM arsenal by a factor of at least 12 to 24. I'm not sure how many were actually shown in that military parade, but clearly they're getting a lot of help from the Chinese. And now there is a nuclear submarine that makes a port call in South Korea. Okay, there's a port just down here, and that's where this American nuclear submarine is docked. And the North Koreans aren't taken too kindly to that. Of course, last week, South Korea rebranded North Korea an enemy state in spite of the armistice that was declared between the North and South in the demilitarized zone. South Korea has now rebranded them an enemy state. So it seems like it's only a matter of time before a war breaks out on that front as well. We've had a lot of close calls with Chinese fighter jets, American spy planes that seem to conveniently and coincidentally have in their plane a CNN reporter for a photo op. I'm not sure if the Americans scripted and planned all that so that they could get that soundbite and that footage, but it's hard to say. China develops nukes at a frightening speed. Is it time for the U.S. and Russia to invite Beijing to the New START? Well, guess what? The New START has been suspended. So by the sounds of things, we're going to need a new treaty altogether. As I said, Israel is stepping up talks with Saudi Arabia over ties to combat Iran. Everybody was under the impression that Saudi Arabia was going to be ditching the petrodollar, and they very well may still be doing so. They may just be trying to do a Turkey thing here where they're playing both sides of the fence. But many people thought that the Saudis and the BRICS nations, China, Russia, South Africa, and others were about to develop their own type of gold-backed global reserve currency that wasn't dependent on the dollar. But it appears as though that Saudis are planning to potentially align with Israel and the Ukrainian NATO alliance if things fall through with the Russians. And this, of course, comes as Netanyahu is holding meetings with his top brass about attacking Iran. The Israelis have issued an ultimatum saying that either the Americans get a military plan or make some sort of military ultimatum to Iran, or they are going to target Iran's nuclear facilities. That, of course, would create a war in the region and create a lot of disruption, okay? Now, let's go down to this bird flu story here. Where to start? Obviously, there was a girl who died, and her father tested positive. They're not sure yet as to whether or not they were both just exposed to the birds, and that this isn't a case of human-to-human transmission. If it is a case of human-to-human transmission, obviously it's of great concern. They're saying that the strain that she was infected by is actually less lethal than what we would typically see in H5N1 variants, which would be north of 60%. So 2/3 of people who catch this tend to pass away, if not more than that. But consider that even a fatality rate of 5% and above would be much, much greater than what we've seen with the virus that's been circulating in the past few years. Although the flu is arguably, it's not as perplexing in some of its symptoms. And there's a lot of things that we don't know about long COVID and all that other stuff that I think a flu is a bit more cut and dry. Even the vaccine technology is a bit more traditional. as opposed to being MNRA based. But now, of course, they're ramping up for that potential. So what concerns me is that because the WHO and the global pharmaceutical industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, they've lost a lot of trust by us. A lot of people don't trust them anymore. And unfortunately, when the real pandemic happens, there's going to be a lot of people who, no matter how bad it is, are going to reject any sort of medical intervention. And it's going to create a big rift, and people are going to end up fighting over it as they were. And the lockdowns are going to be more severe because this will be a far more deadly virus. They're still unclear as to whether or not there's human-to-human transmission occurring, but it seems like it's only a matter of time. We're looking at an unprecedented bird flu outbreak. Never before has these numbers been seen in the wild, and now you're seeing it in mammal populations. You're even seeing mammal-to-mammal transmission of the bird flu, signaling that this thing can not only jump and infect mammals like us, but it can also eventually mutate to transmit amongst mammals. I believe they first seen that in sea lions, and it's probably only a matter of time before it starts to be seen in carnivores, which may consume birds like wolves, bears, especially wolves because they're a pack animal. So I can imagine, foxes, wolves, things like that, who would eat a bird would probably be some of the first where you'd see something like that happening. You're going to have to forgive me today, guys. I'm a little under the weather, but based on what's going on in the world, I am one of the lucky ones right now because the shizzy's just hitting the fizzy all over the place. So the health chiefs are ramping up a global bird flu vaccine drive if cases spread. And it's amazing how little attention is being paid to this. It's incredible. In light of all of the hoopla over the thing that's been circulating the last 3 years, you would think that a virus with such a high fatality rate would be making news headlines, but it's barely scratching the surface. And I don't think it's because it wouldn't get clicks. Clearly, it would get all kinds of clicks, but for some reason, they're minimizing it. And that's concerning because you have to ask yourself, why are they minimizing it? Is the question. According to Morgan Stanley, U.S. markets are in a death zone. Okay, they're basically saying that the stock prices are at elevated levels since the start of this year, and the S&P could tumble to 3,000 points, which would be a 26% reduction from its current level. And this is just based on the fact that the market's overvalued. And there really is no reason for us to have good prospects for the future right now. I mean, if we had stability and there was no war, then you could make an argument for these high PE ratios, price to earnings ratios. Okay, so it's the idea that companies can be valued higher because there's the promise that, if there's a good chance that these companies are going to be more profitable in the future. But if we don't even have global stability, a lot of these inflated prices are not justifiable. The Cantillon effect, this is something that I've known about intuitively, but I never really understood the name for it. Basically, it's when you have a national currency and the central bank prints a fiat currency. Now, the first recipients of that fiat currency can go and buy up hard assets. Okay, so they're the first ones who have access to, the money. They can go and buy land, they can buy stuff, they can buy gold, various commodities. Eventually, there's a trickle-down effect to the lowly peasant class, who of course is going to end up paying more for those things because as the rich buy up all the stuff, the price for it increases. By the time that money makes its way to you through debt and loans and whatever you getting paid from a company that was created on the basis of a loan, while the money is worth a lot less. So it's a way of, it's another form of taxation in a way. And Yellen is now saying that we're going to send 10 billion more in economic aid to Ukraine. Great. What a great time to do that. This is an interesting infographic here, okay? And some people are not going to put a whole lot of stock in it, but something to consider anyways. This is, if you're born in 2010, how much stuff is left? So oil is going to run out by after 2050. And when they say run out, I think they're more so referring to, we're going to get to a point where there's a lot of oil in the ground, but the cost to extract it is just prohibitive. So you're getting 1.1 barrels of energy for the 1 barrel you invest. It's not even worth it at that point, right? So I think that's where we have to kind of interpret this as. It's fine if you have a bunch of oil in the ground, but if it costs more to extract it than you make off it, then it's virtually, it might as well not exist at all. Natural gas by 2075, uranium by 2080, and coal by 2136. So we got lots of coal. Rare earth metals, we got till 2856. So we got lots of rare earth metals. So those are things like, what is that? Let's see here. I'm not even going to begin to pronounce some of these. Neodymium, samarium. Anyways, we got lots of rare earth metals, but I think a lot of those are in China and Russia. Indium, we're going to run out by 2035. Lead, we're going to run out by 2029. That's crazy. Antimony, going to run out right now, apparently. Zinc, we're going to run out by 2031. Silver is going to run out by 2032. Gold going to run out by 2030. Gold production has peaked. Now, there was some reports that Uganda had found $12 trillion worth of gold. They're saying that those prices are wildly exaggerated, and there still is no actual proof of those gold deposits. But this is a good reason to capitalize on gold right now, because if gold production declines to such an extent where there's simply no more of it, they're saying there's only 50,000 tons in known reserves. There's been 250,000 tons mined throughout all of history. If you're telling me there's only 50,000 tons left, imagine how inflationary that's going to be, or deflationary. The price of gold is only going to go up if you're mining less and less of it. Copper, 2050. And it also shows on this infographic where the various countries who have all this stuff. And as you can see, most of it is in Russia and Southeast Asia. So it's no surprise that Europe, that has nothing, is wanting to mine the crap and wanting to balkanize Russia and Southeast Asia. I'm presuming that there's probably a lot more in Africa than we even know, because a lot of that's unexplored. So I wouldn't be surprised that if many of these numbers in Russia, Asia, Africa, even South and Central America, probably in Canada as well, because there's a lot of unsurveyed regions in the north, possess a lot more. But just something to think about, that there's a reason why all this conflict is happening. It's in part driven by greedy people who want more and more, but it's also due to real deal material scarcity. We live on a finite planet, and until we are able to get AI to engineer some spaceships so we can go and mine other planets and the infinite cosmos, we're stuck here, and we're stuck fighting over what remains. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and please go and check out the interview we did yesterday with, I'm drawing a blank here, Joel Salatin. I was going to say Joel Skousen, but that was a different video. Joel Salatin, the lunatic farmer. Anyways, it won't bring it up here, but I would encourage you to go check that out. In my opinion, that was probably the best interview we've ever done, one of the most informative. Joel Salatin is a world-renowned self-sustainability farmer who has been approached in the past year by several billionaires who want him to build them agrarian bunkers, okay? Basically places of refuge, bug out locations that they can live off grid if things get really crazy. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Stay ready. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.